Look, you've clicked onto this video because you're new to Magic perhaps, and now I'm about to explain to you about a worm that you can cast if you see it while looking through your library, and we haven't even talked about searching your deck yet. Hi, I'm Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet, and I make videos about Magic the Gathering primarily on a YouTube channel also called PleasantKenobi. And today I'm here with IGN to answer some questions. We've got novice questions, we've got adept questions, we've got expert questions, and I think we've got one silly question too. So let's dive in with the novice questions. Can someone explain Magic the Gathering to me like I'm 5 years old? Magic the Gathering is a card game in which you play as two wizards or planeswalkers who use magical spells to try and off or kill the other wizard. That means that you need to reduce the life total from like 40 or 20 depending on the formats, using monsters, gribblies and spells and such. The wizard thing kind of starts to fall apart in a recent time though, where you're summoning like SpongeBob SquarePants and Spider-Man. That doesn't really make sense in the Magic thing, but we'll come to that more in a moment, I think. What are all the different formats of Magic the Gathering? This is a very difficult question to answer without getting really into the weeds, but I'm gonna try. So first of all, you have constructed and you have limited. Constructed is where you build your deck ahead of time, you bring it to the event, your friend's house or whatever and play Magic. Limited is where you show up, open packs, and build a deck at the table with the stuff you've opened. So they're the two like overarching ways to play. And then constructed breaks down into like a dozen, 2 dozen main formats and then sub-formats as well. So for example, standard is where you play with everything for the last 5 years, and modern is where you play with everything for the last 20 years, and legacy and vintage is where you play with everything for the last 30 years. Then you get commander, which moves the game to being 4-player, and you have a 100-card deck, not a 60-card deck. As you can see, there's a lot of different ways to play Magic. The ones you need to know are kind of standard and commander. They're the main ways people play. And then with limited, there's a load of different ways to play, cube being the best, but let's not get into that right now. But the main one I should mention is pre-release, which is when a new set comes out, you can go to your local game store, you get a box with 6 packs and a little promo in it, you build a deck and you play with other people, and you're playing the set for the first time. So everyone's on an even playing field, you're not bringing a powerful deck from home. It's a great way to interact with the new cards with other people that may not have even seen the cards yet. New player here, curious about what the colours mean. So in Magic the Gathering, there are 5 colours. White, blue, black, red and green. And I think I might have said them not in the canonical order, which will upset some hardcore people with the comments. Each of these is a thematic or philosophical like part of the colour pie that they make up. So white, for example, cares about justice and balance. Red is about instinct and impulsiveness. Black is about greatness at any cost and death. Green is about rebirth and life and growth. And blue is about being smarter than your opponent, being a little bit sly perhaps. It's about brain power. All of those things are like philosophically a thing, and then each one has mechanical identities that fit that. So for example, I won't go through all of them, but with red, they have access to a lot of cards that impulsively draw. So what that means is it gives you access to a new card, but it's only temporary if you use it there and then. It's to try and mechanically evoke that feeling of doing something in the moment, and if you don't, you lose it. And it's one of the beautiful things about Magic is that they are very good at taking those overarching themes and making them feel like a certain way using the mechanics and how the cards crunch and work. How do I effectively explain what mana is and how it works to new players? Mana is the base resource system for Magic. When you cast a spell, whether that be a spell that puts a creature on the board or a spell that shoots your opponent in the face, you pay mana. It's the cost in the top right-hand corner of the spell. Usually that mana is produced by lands. This is a fundamental part of Magic that other card games have tried to fix over the years and have never really come to a worthwhile conclusion. Lands are part of your deck building. You draw them alongside your other cards and you play 1 per turn. And what that does is it gives you like a ramping escalation to the game, where on turn 1 you might have only 1 mana by tapping that land, turning it sideways to generate 1 mana, where by turn 4 or 5 you have 4 or 5 lands, which produces 4 or 5 mana and plays bigger spells. So mana is a resource that is representative of the energy you're drawing from the land around you as a wizard, planeswalker, or someone in the Spider-Man universe, I guess. But it's the mana you pull from the ground to cast the spells that you do the duel with. Is it very hard to start playing Magic the Gathering? No, not at all. I would argue that Magic is one of the easiest games in the world to begin playing, but it's so deep and complex when you really get into the weeds of it that it's one of the hardest games to master. And Magic also has a digital client with a full-based tutorial with a little wisp thing, a bit like Navi from Ocarina of Time if you're a 30-plus-year-old person like me, that teaches you the game. So I think Magic is very, very easy to start playing, especially with Arena now. Is Magic the Gathering Arena a decent way to try the game? It's absolutely, easily the best way to start playing Magic. If someone tells you you need to start playing with Commander, I think that's a bad suggestion because it makes the game infinitely more complex than it needs to be to learn. Arena is great for learning. The one caveat I would say here is that Arena's monetization is, if we're charitable, not good. So if you're looking to play Magic a lot, Arena can be very expensive. If you like Limited, where you draft and play with cards by opening them, it's actually quite good. You can go infinite and free to play. If you like Constructed, where you need to keep up with a meta game that rotates and changes, it's quite expensive. So overall, Arena is a good way to learn to play, and the play experience is pretty smooth, but the monetization is bad. How expensive is Magic the Gathering to get into? To get into, it can be very, very cheap. Your local game store will probably give you a welcome deck that is free, and Arena, like I said, can be free to play depending on what mode you're playing. It can be cheap. And as you move into other formats like Commander or Standard, it can get a lot more expensive. Cards can range from anything from pennies to, well, thousands of dollars to millions of dollars if you get really into the super collectible stuff you don't need to play. There are affordable, depending on what you class as affordable, like intro products at like the £20 range where you get 2 decks to play against one another. And then you can get pre-con decks for Commander that are £40 or £50, and that's an out-of-the-box playable experience. Basically, you can spend as much money on Magic as you want, is why I'm getting at it. So to get into it, no, it's not that expensive, but it is a rabbit hole you can go very deep down. The other important point, I guess, is that proxies are way more acceptable than they ever were, but we're going to come to that more with another question in a moment. I'm new to Magic. Explain it like I'm 5, the Universes Beyond controversy. Okay, up top, I'm gonna say that I'm a big fan of Universes Beyond, but this is the best way to explain it, and it does make me sound like an idiot for liking it. Imagine you're watching The Sopranos, let's say, and you love The Sopranos. And then suddenly, in episode 5 of season 4, SpongeBob SquarePants shows up, and he's canonically part of The Sopranos now. He's part of the storyline, his character is thematically important now. That's what Universes Beyond was for a lot of Magic players. Now, of course, Magic is a game, so you could do this argument for anything. Imagine if Call of Duty had SpongeBob SquarePants show up. You know what, that probably hasn't far off happened. This is kind of a thing in the gaming landscape is crossovers. The people who make Magic are very smart, and they've seen that as a popular thing, and they're making a lot of money and bringing new players to the game with it. I would argue that Magic engages with those properties better than most things, better than Fortnite, better than Call of Duty and all these other crossover games, where instead of it just being a shallow reference, sometimes it is, but often with the Lord of the Rings set, less so with Spider-Man, maybe less said about that the better. But Lord of the Rings is a good example. It's an entire set of cards that when you play it, you feel thematically like you're playing a Lord of the Rings game with characters that represent and fit those characters. The rules of Magic are so involved and so good at representing that like philosophical, like color pie stuff that I mentioned earlier, but you can do incredible work of showing off how Warhammer works or the Warhammer world works in mechanical cards. It all evokes the thing in a way that I think other games struggle to do because Magic's rules are so good. Proxies, illegal or legal? Officially, if you're playing in a Wizards sanctioned event, which is basically any event ran by a store that is sanctioned by Wizards, has a WPN status, let's not unpack all of that. That is a situation where you cannot play with proxies. A lot of events that you're playing, especially in the modern day, will not be sanctioned. It'll just be playing Commander with people on a table at a game store at your home. And thus, proxies are more readily available and played than they ever were. Some formats don't really work without proxies. Cube. I won't go into the weeds of that, but it's a format where you draft all the best cards in Magic, usually. In that format, most people don't own a Black Lotus or a Mox Pearl, which we're going to come to more in a moment as well. So proxies allow people to still play that format. Again, you don't want to take your collection, even if you own them, to a pub where people can spill drinks on it or even steal them. So proxies, again, give you the option to do that. Wizards' official stance is not in tournament play, not in sanctioned play, but they also call them playtest cards, because they also understand before you commit to buying even a £10 card, you might want to see if it's any good in your deck by playtesting with it. The one area where they're completely staunchly against it is if those playtest cards can pass for real cards. At that point, and I believe this too, I'm pro proxy, but a card that is back and front exactly the same as a real card before you start looking through a jeweler's loop and doing bend tests and stuff, that's not a proxy, that's a fake. And Wizards care primarily about the reuse of their intellectual property. So what you'll find is they will often not have the official tap symbol or the official mana symbols. Those symbols are replaced with legally distinct things. So instead of the green mana symbol, you've got a broccoli or a tree, basically. Okay, it's time for the Adept questions. So what exactly is the deal with the Power 9? The Power 9 is the 9 most powerful cards from original Alpha or Beta. The 9 are the Black Lotus, all 5 Color of Moxen, Ancestral Recall, Time Walk, and Time Twister. The Power 9 was in Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited, so basically the very first set, the first reprint of the first set, and the second reprint of the first set. When they did another one, revised, the 4th reprint of the original set, not to be mistaken with the 4th edition, we won't get into that right now, they didn't reprint them, and thus they become harder to get hold of and become more sought after. The important point is the original Power 9 are some of the most powerful cards of all time. They are still better than most things printed today, and thus they begin to demand huge price tags. 2 years ago, a Black Lotus from Alpha sold for around $2 million. Debatably, Lotus is the most powerful of the original Power 9 because it costs 0 mana, so you can play it for free, and then it cracks and sacks, so you tap it and put it in your graveyard, your bin, your discard pile, and generate 3 mana. 3 mana that would normally need 3 lands. So a Lotus plus a land on your first turn allows you to play a 4 mana spell. You remember what I mentioned about like escalation earlier? Well, this breaks the escalation wide open. These cards are really expensive. Obviously there's proxies of them out there, but the majority of formats they're just not legal in. Standard, last 5 years. Modern, last 20 years. Legacy, which is the entire card pool, the Power 9 is banned. Commander, the Power 9, except for Time Twister, is banned. But if you're playing amongst friends, of course you can play with whatever you want that's not on a ban list. I would say though that if you're playing a Lotus in your casual deck against your friends who aren't playing a Lotus, you're probably a scumbag. If you do want to play with the Power 9 and not be a scumbag, Canadian Highlander. I'll leave it at that, you can look it up. Alpha Moose 13 asks, genuine question, why does the reserve list exist? The reserve list is a promise that Wizards of the Coast made in 1996 to not print a load of cards, including the Power 9. That's why they're so expensive. Wizards just can't reprint them. The reason it exists is that they printed a set called Chronicles, which was a reprint of all the stuff that everyone wanted at the time, except for the Power 9. And when Chronicles came out, it crashed the secondary market being the price of Magic cards at the time. And lots of stores and collectors all panicked and thought about selling out or just not stocking Magic anymore because it turned out that this thing they thought was a miniature stock market wasn't going to be a miniature stock market. Wizards panicked and then did a promise in one of the magazines at the time. This promise, according to Wizards of the Coast, because they wrote it in a magazine, is legally binding via promissory estoppel or something. I'm not a lawyer. There's a lot of debate and arguments as to whether Wizards of the Coast are lying and just don't want to reprint these things because it keeps like a gold standard under the secondary market, which I think might be half true, to be fair. But that's the reason the reserve list exists. It was to instill faith in collectors and stores holding large inventory of Magic cards that the cards would hold some sort of value. The funny thing is, they say it's legally binding, but over the years they've changed the reserve list, including printing cards that were on the reserve list at points and taking them off. On top of all of that, Wizards of the Coast basically printed their own proxies at one point recently called Anniversary Edition, which was the original packs of Alpha, but with card backs that weren't the Magic backs and thus aren't legal for tournaments. The problem is, A, they're proxies, and B, they were £1,000 or $1,000 for 4 booster packs. It was the most egregiously, disgustingly overpriced thing Wizards of the Coast have ever done. It was so bad that everyone hated it. And then when they put them on sale, they had to conclude the sale only maybe 6 or 8 hours later, suggesting that they sold very little of it. And then some of it showed up in a landfill later. I am now unloading a whole other controversy, but it's a proof of how the reserve list is messy, and Wizards of the Coast desperately want to get around it so they can reprint these things people want, like Lotuses and Tropical Islands and other things that are on the reserve list, but they kind of can't. It's messy. MoistCar994 asks, can someone explain brackets to me like I'm 5 years old? In the format of Commander, where 4 people sit around a table and play with 100 card decks that are singleton ruled, meaning you can only play one of each card, the format itself is kind of nonsense. It's not a tournament format. It's very like, you're not meant to really yuck people's yum. You're not meant to be too aggressive. You're not meant to play cards or stop other people from doing things. And thus it's become a social minefield for getting a good game with people who are in the same headspace that you are. In the past, you could try to argue what power level your deck was. Is it a 1 through 10? But no one had an official stance or number for that. People would say their decks are 7, then you'd play against them and find out they definitely aren't a 7. Everyone thought their decks were 7s, by the way. So the old power system didn't really work because there was no official language. Recently, the format went through a big shake-up where they changed the people who were like in control of it. That's a controversy we won't unpack right now. Those people gave us the bracket system. So in essence, the bracket system is 1 through 5, and they're basically different power levels of Magic. And some of them have some very hard and fast rules about how many game changers you can have, for example. A game changer is basically a card that's considered very, very good, but not bannable. This bracket system is far from perfect, and there are lots of criticisms for it that I won't unpack right now. But the important point is that the bracket system is so much better codified than the previous loosey-goosey 1 through 10, where every deck was a 7, that it allows us to have a mutual language. So if I sit down with a table and we all agree we're in bracket 3, it actually hard codes some of the stuff we're doing, and it leads to a better play experience. I don't personally think the bracket system is necessarily good, but it's so much better than what we had, and it leads to Commander actually working. Because Commander as a format doesn't work unless we all have the same social contract going in. Is 37 lands enough for the average Commander deck? You're not going to like my answer, but no, it is not. The absolute bare minimum for your average Commander deck should be 38, and there's some reasons for this. At 38 lands, you approximately, when you draw your opening 7, have 2.4 lands, which veers towards 2. The average casting cost of a spell in one of those decks will be more than 3, so your opening hand can't cast most things in your deck. Beyond all of that, it gets worse, because as you start to draw extra cards into your deck, the math looks very bad when you're sub 38. It takes like 4 turns to hit your 3rd land drop, at which point you're just losing and you're miserable. Basically, you need to, what I call, eat your vegetables. Lands aren't exciting. Well, they can be if your deck actually cares about lands. They aren't the most exciting part of Magic, but they are fundamentally a very important part of Magic. So play your 38 lands at a bare minimum, and you will enjoy making your land drops and playing Magic. Should I double sleeve my deck? Sleeving Magic cards is where you take a card and put it in a sleeve, which means that it doesn't get wear and tear when you shuffle it, and it's immune somewhat to liquids like spit or sweat, and it just keeps your cards in good nick. Perfect fitting them inside, then putting them in a sleeve is double sleeving. The main reason you do this is to absolutely protect the cards. Some people even do the test where they put them in a glass of water and double sleeving can keep them dry. I would say that if your deck is expensive, or you just simply really like the cards and have sentimental value, you should double sleeve them to avoid someone spilling a glass of Coke on your cards down the pub. It's not essential, but it can help protect your cards. Could someone help me understand why very occasionally they will print a new card that's functionally identical to a previous card? There's 2 main reasons for this. One is that design space is somewhat limited, especially without creating new design space through really wild mechanics. And thus, sometimes they'll just have to reuse old designs. Now, the argument would be if they reuse an old design, like a Quarter's Shield, you could just reprint a Quarter's Shield, right? But an Accorder is something that is unique to the plane of Mirren, I believe. But when they functionally reprinted it into one of the Innistrad sets as Cathar's Shield, Cathars are literally the warrior priest paladins of the Church of Avacyn. And thus, it makes more sense to have it called Cathar's Shield because it is thematically on point for the plane of Innistrad where these Cathars exist. And thus, instead of just like changing the stats arbitrarily, they will functionally reprint the card as the same functional thing, just change the name. Interestingly, there is a mild controversy for that. You might have noticed a trend here, there's just a lot of controversies in Magic. But the reason there's a controversy is that Commander, the most popular format in all of Magic, is a singleton format where you play one of a card. And the argument is, as they do functional reprints, or close to functional reprints, things that do the same sort of role, that the format stops being singleton anymore, because you might have 13 cards that functionally or close to functionally do the same thing. Now, the example I gave you, like a Quarter's Shield and Cathar's Shield, aren't one of those examples, but it's just a current trend that people have noticed in design. That's even singleton decks are getting more consistent as Wizards of the Coast copy their own homework, I guess. Ben the Bruiser says, maybe a silly question, why isn't Sol Ring banned? Firstly, it's really funny because if we're talking about Commander, it's not banned. But if we're talking about Legacy, for example, one of the most powerful formats in the entire game, it is banned. I guess we should start with what Sol Ring is. So it's a 1-mana artifact that taps for 2 colorless mana. Now, that might to a new player not seem like a big deal, but a rate of 1 mana making 2 off an artifact is a rate you just don't see. When I say rate, I'm talking about like what you get back for the initial investment. Normally to get 2 mana of a mana rocket normally costs 4 mana or more. Sol Ring was printed in the original Alpha set through into Unlimited. The card is arguably up there with the Power 9. It's not one of the Power 9, mainly because it wasn't on the reserve list and got reprinted. I'll talk more about that in just a second. But Sol Ring is so powerful that in a situation where you're drafting all the best cards in Magic and you have 15 cards in your hand and you have a Mox or even a Black Lotus on Sol Ring, there's a debate that Sol Ring is better because Sol Ring gives you 2 mana every turn, where Black Lotus that we discussed earlier gives you 3 mana once. And thus, it's very easy to prove that Sol Ring is just better than these cards that are currently banned in Commander. The reason that Sol Ring isn't banned, and this is a debatable one, but I'm going to give you my personal perspective. Well, firstly, it was printed in the original Precon decks. In 2011, they made Magic the Gathering precons for Commander, where you could buy them off the shelf and play them against each other or other people, and it gave you an in to Commander. So we're talking like 100 precons, and they've all got Sol Ring in them. So Sol Ring not only is available in all precon decks, everyone has easy access to it, it's powerful and fun to play with, it's become like synonymous with the format. Some people argue that Commander is the Sol Ring format, and that Sol Ring is a pillar, a staple, or part of the format's identity. And the card is just too good. In 1v1 Magic, like in Legacy, like I said, it's banned. The other mitigating factor for Commander is that A, Commander doesn't matter, it's not a tournament format, so it's really the muck about and find out format. But 2, if one person plays a Sol Ring and gets ahead, you're in a 4-player environment where 3 people can gang up on you as well. So a lot of the overpowered nature of cards that are too good in a 1v1 environment get lessened in a multiplayer environment. So in short, if they created Commander today, I'm pretty sure Sol Ring would have got banned. But it wasn't. It was cheap-ish when the format first started. They started putting every single precon because they could reprint it, and then now everyone loves it. People love Sol Ring. People have Sol Ring t-shirts. People have Sol Ring tattoos. It is basically the only place you can play it other than Canlander, I mentioned it again, is Commander. So that's kind of why it's still there. And it is a fun card to play with. What's the best colour historically? If we talk holistically about Magic in its entire timeline, it's quite easily blue. In the original Power 9, 3 of the cards are blue and the rest are colourless. There's literally not a single card from the other colours. Blue also has access to some of the most historically powerful effects. For example, blue can interact with the stack. Every other colour can kill things that are in play and do damage and destroy target creature. Blue is the colour of counter magic. So when someone casts the spell and it's existing on the stack, which is like the ethereal place where cards go when they're not in your hand and they're not in play, the in-between, blue can interact with that space more so and almost exclusively what other colours can't. This leads to some wild stuff. There's a card called Force of Will, which allows you to counter a spell for free for no mana, as long as you pitch another blue card from your hand. So blue interacts in a way that other colours don't. It also draws more cards than other colours. And drawing cards, even though I'm not much of a blue player myself, but drawing cards is the best part of Magic. It's like a little present every time you do it. The most famous example of this is Ancestral Recall in the original Power 9. It's 1 blue mana to draw 3. To illustrate just how good blue is compared to the other colours, Ancestral Recall is part of what we call a cycle. A cycle is a set of cards where there's 1 in each colour. So the red one does some damage, the green one pumps your creature by 3, the black one gives you 3 mana, which is very strong, and the white one gives you 3 life, which is absolutely dog water. And in essence, the blue one is so good, it's banned in almost every format you can play it in, where the rest of them are not. Do you see what I mean? Even in the early days, they didn't realise how good drawing cards was. 3 or 4 years of the game's life, blue was just drawing cards like a crazy person and countering spells, and the other colours were like, white was stuck just like gaining life. It was not good. They've done a very good job of catching the other colours up, and if we're honest, in the last 5 years, red has absolutely been ruining Magic in many formats. It's actually a problem. But yes, blue is easily the best colour. It's the reason that the joke is that Island is the best card in all of Magic, because it lets you cast blue spells. It's blue. It's easily blue, and I say that as someone who doesn't like to play blue that much. Okay, it's time for the expert questions now. Mana Chicken 4G says, what the hell are layers? Layers is a thing that you really don't need to know as a casual or new player. It's basically how the rules are laid out and hard codified, how things affect a card that's in play. So for example, if you have multiple effects that are changing its color, changing its type, changing how strong it is, its power in the bottom right hand corner, they are applied in layers so that if you need to figure out which one takes precedent and which one affects the card over another one, it gives you a very rigid structure to figure that out. I guess the important point about layers and that hard codified thing is we can sort of zoom out and explain that Magic has the best, most hard codified rule system in all of tabletop gaming. So in essence, layers is just one part of a huge, huge document that you never need to read, but a judge or a tournament organizer can use that to basically figure out what's wrong in a game and fix it. Magic's rule system, and I'm not, sounds like I'm biased, but it's incredible. It's so tight, it's so efficient, and layers is just one version of that. Why doesn't Panglacial Wurm work in the rules? Look, you've clicked onto this video because you're new to Magic perhaps, and now I'm about to explain to you about a worm that you can cast if you see it while looking through your library, and we haven't even talked about searching a deck yet. In essence, there are effects in Magic the Gathering that allow you to look through your deck. The most commonly used ones would be Fetch Land, a land that you sacrifice to look through your deck for a specific other land. This effect is called a tutor, named after Demonic Tutor, a classic old card that's 2 black mana, search for anything in your deck. Panglacial Wurm is the only card in all of Magic the Gathering that literally says you can cast it from your library while searching your library. It's thematically that you're discovering an ancient defrosting worm in the remnants of history, because that's what the theming of the set was. The problem is that this is one card in 29,000 cards that does this, and it creates some rules headaches. So for example, you have a card like Millikin. Millikin says you can tap it to make a mana, but when you tap it, you mill a card from the top of your library. When you cast Panglacial Wurm, you're meant to continue doing the searching that you were doing, right? But what if the card you were searching for was on top of your library, and in order to cast Panglacial Wurm, you tapped the Millican to make a mana and mill the top card of your library? What if that top card was the one you were searching for? Now we've got a Rules Nightmare, which we have an answer for. Judges have figured out the answer. It's messy, and the point is, it's a messy answer for one bloody card out of 29,000 cards. Basically, Panglacial Wurm is a unique effect that makes other rules in the game not quite work, even though the game is so tightly coded, because the game isn't coded around one of 29,000 cards. Panglacial Wurm is a mistake, essentially, but it's a funny one. How responsible am I for letting my opponents know what their cards do? Okay, the context is super important here, right? You're playing casually with your friends at a kitchen table, you know the vibe where you can catch people out, sure. Or you're at the game store and you're playing with new people that you've never played with before, you should be a nice opponent and be sporting and help them with their cards. That's all Commander, right? If we move again back to other stuff like Standard, Modern, and Legacy, actually in a competitive environment, it is not your responsibility to baby or hold the hand of your opponent if they don't know what their cards do. Magic is a really interesting game in that because it's so hard codified, you can just make mistakes. Play a card, it does a thing, an interaction you weren't kind of expecting, and things go badly. So if someone plays a card and they don't know it's going to trigger and do a thing with one of your cards, that's really on them in a competitive environment. So the sportsmanship in a casual place is help them to learn. But if you're playing for prizes, you can let them make mistakes. They should learn from their own mistakes, right? Is concede in response a valid strategy? We're back to that whole question of context again. In a 1v1 environment, you can concede at any time. That's literally a piece of text written into the rules of Magic. A player may concede at any time. And thus, sure, sometimes if your opponent's just got you, just don't waste the time and concede. In multiplayer, conceding in response, I believe, is referring to the idea of, okay, let's get a hypothetical on the go. Someone's attacking you with a creature holding a Sword of Feast and Famine. Once the creature hits you and does damage, it will untap the player controlling the sword and untap all their lands, essentially doubling their mana for the turn. The idea that you can concede in response or at any time means that as they attack you, you can scoop out, you can concede, you no longer exist, the damage doesn't happen, they don't get the trigger, they don't untap their lands. I personally think that's very scummy, because you do things in Magic based upon the idea that someone doesn't just randomly disappear from the game. It's kind of king-making, it's kind of abusive of the rules a little bit. A lot of the people that I play with have this like house rule that if someone has to go, like, you know, they've got a call that their child is ill and must leave, we pretend they're still there until the turn is finished. So that triggers like Sword of Feast and Famine can still happen, for example. So it's valid in 1v1, save your own time, life is finite, etc. In multiplayer, don't be a dick. That's almost it, but we have one more fun question. How do you feel about this? This is the stereotype as old as time itself, or I guess arguably started in 1993, that card gamers kind of smell. It's kind of true. Like, I think that actually when you get a lot of men in a space, they do start to smell when they get warm. I went to a wargaming convention recently, smelled really nice at 10 AM, and by 3 PM, it stank. So it's not just card gamers, it's not just Magic players, it's Yu-Gi-Oh players, it's Magic players, it's wargamers. I will say though, in defense of Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh actually hard-coded this into their rules recently. You can be disqualified from a tournament for smelling, where Magic is just a poster on a wall at game stores. So take that, Yu-Gi-Oh. I hope that was informative or entertaining, or maybe even both. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet, and I talk about Magic really in the weeds, from community to current news to everything in between, over on my YouTube channel, PleasantKenobi. If you want to hear some other questions answered, you've got a burning question in the back of your mind, comment it down below, and we might use them for a future video.